Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Saving Zoe, which originally I had seen and reviewed this film on an app called Netflix, but it seems that now this movie has been seemingly shifted to another free movie app that people may have heard of called Tubi, Tubi. It's a free movie and TV service that at the end of the day you could say you've seen for any number of things for absolutely free. Going into this film, really, I would say there is some kind of mystery going on within this film. We end up having this be very much a kind of uh, fascinating like film of Echo trying to figure out what actually happened to her sister Zoe. And we really have that investigation, where we really have that discovery going on, but eventually we also end up having eventually Echo, who is to eventually also realize what had gone on with Zoe, and now this turns into some kind of investigation that Echo has to do upon herself, upon her own. So we end up going along here, and a bulk of this movie is honestly and truly just a lot of common like stuff. We end up having a girl who is consistently getting ready for school. We end up having eventually Echo is to eventually follow Zoe throughout her life via a diary, and we are to also have it to where Echo is to eventually fall into the same friends as Zoe did and get into that kind of adventure. But also, we end up having Echo, who ends up also clinging on to the last boyfriend which Zoe was to have within this film, uh, which could mean any number of things, I'm sure. Really, I think the problem with this film is I don't think overall there is a uh, good enough story here. Like, I like the mystery. If anything, this kind of reminds me of like 13 Reasons Why, which some people might enjoy. To me, this is one of those films where they they have this kind of mystery buildup which they don't actually solve towards the end of the film. We end up having it to where reasonably, I guess you can like the journey, the way of which that this movie goes, I guess. But then there's also this really hard turn of us actually finding out, well, people are doing illegal acts here and putting together some uh, illegal videos, let's just say, and reasonably like, wow, like this movie took a really hard turn at some point, and like it's like, wow, this is this kind of movie. Okay. Okay, sure. But anyways, yeah, like I don't know. I just like I think originally when I reviewed this, I immediately just found out how like bizarrely like popular this movie was, and so I decided, like, well, hey, how about I just re-review this and just kind of see if people are still interested in this review, or people are just like, meh, yeah, hey, like somebody found this movie again, because yeah, it might still be interesting to some people. So really, we have it to where I think the big kind of confusion of this film is it honestly seems like Echo looks a lot like Zoe through a bulk of this film. So there's sometimes where I'm getting consistently confused between the two, and I'm having to decipher which one is Echo and which one is Zoe, because eventually we end up having Echo in some point of this film kind of doing her hair like Zoe had done, and we have also Echo starting to wear the clothes that Zoe did, and it's starting to get very, very confusing between these two characters, kind of between uh, like even like people that know both Echo and Zoe are also kind of getting very confused. The interesting thing about this story is we end up having Kim Jong as a therapist in this movie, and he does a really great job because he's freaking Kim Jong. Like, what are you expecting? Him to just phone this performance in? No, he's gonna give you the best he can do. And plus, he also kind of um, like seems to be very familiar with Zoe, and I kind of enjoy that where it seems like this character doesn't have a disconnect with the story, because I know there's a lot of times where they just bring certain characters in that don't know exactly what's going on, um, or usually just don't help the story all that often, but Ken actually did, which I do appreciate. Going into this film, I liked the character actually named Mark. We end up having Mark, who seems to fall seemingly in love with Zoe, and Mark is to eventually be a struggling person who is trying to put right, I guess, with once he went wrong at some point. But anyways, so we eventually go on into this movie to eventually find out that it seems that Zoe ends up going into the wrong crowd. And eventually, while going into the wrong crowd, she ends up going along and just seemingly getting further and further and further pushed into this rabbit hole so far that she ends up almost becoming broken, or almost coming to the point of just like she just can't go on anymore. She can't keep doing this, or reasonably, she's going to wind up, dare say, dead. Does that actually happen in the end of this film? Who knows? But I do. Who knows? Me. I watched the film. So I'm leaving there kind of being like a mystery of even like us trying to figure out what happened at the end here, or I actually have a real legitimate answer of what happens at the very end, and maybe Sophie dies, maybe Echo dies, maybe everyone dies. Who knows? If you watch the movie, you know exactly what happens. So going on to this film, we really have to kind of carry this entire story basically on Zoe's diary, which I kind of was just like, I kind of like that. I can, like, when you probably watch a movie like 13 Reasons Why, or a show like 13 Reasons Why, like, it kind of goes along that same kind of route where you end up having something that has the main girl, like, talking about, like, her problems and her struggles and whatever, and she, like, seemingly does it in a different way than Zoe does. But like, I'm really trying to carry the 13 Reasons Why analogy. Like, I'm not trying to like tag that into this movie, like, because reasonably, I'm still just naturally assessing or assuming that this movie at some point could be trending. Uh, but if it's not, then it's another video to go out. So let's go on to spoilers about this film, because at the end of the day, it's either you've seen this film or you've never heard of it, and you're just like, why is he reviewing a film like this? Why is he going out of his way to talk about this film? Ba 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 ba. So, if you had either seen this movie on Netflix or gone out of your way to rewatch this movie on Tubi, either way, go ahead and check this film out without a doubt. Thank you for watching this review, but I think it's about that time to covetedly go into that spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this review. So, going into this, we end up having, of course, Echo and Zoe, who are to go through their common morning. We end up having both of them brushing their teeth, and eventually we end up having Echo to go onto the bus, eventually go on to school, and eventually we end up having Echo, who ends up saying some comment to Zoe, but then eventually we end up having Zoe, who bizarrely vanishes. And we're like, so what? We are to basically end up realizing that this Zoe person is gone, is dead, is missing link of the world. To where we really end up having it to where Echo is to basically be the Echo of Zoe. We end up having it to where Echo is to go on to uh, find Zoe's diary and try to figure out what had led her to the very tail end of this movie, where we actually see what ends up happening to Zoe. We end up having us uh, see that Zoe evidently would tell her mother that she is going and doing work, but instead she would actually go to some party where eventually she is to meet a guy named Mark, who seems to go to a party not to drink because he's a recovering alcoholic, I guess. But instead, he went to this party specifically to see Zoe. I think that's a load of bullcrap. But like this guy was just trying to win this girl over by saying like, "Yeah, I came to the party just to get with you." Yeah, right. It's a coincidence that both of them bumped into one another. So we end up having consistently Echo reading Zoe's diary to find out that she had gotten a job as a receptionist for Kim Jong's character, the therapist. And I don't even know what his actual name is. Oh, Dr. Galler? Ken Jong. Because I really appreciate that Ken Jong. Been watching him on The Masked Singer. Anyways, so going on into here, we end up having Zoe, who is to, instead of actually legitimately doing her job, it seems that her and Mark are making out within this environment of which that both this doctor and like we have it to where these two characters are basically going at it at this doctor's place. To where, of course, the doctor isn't like watching on weirdly, whatever. So we eventually have it to where Echo is to eventually go on and seemingly uh, continue to go to school, where we end up having Zoe's best friend, who is now seemingly a pill popper of sorts, and I believe her name is Carly. I believe so. We end up having Carly, yeah. We end up having Carly, who like was Zoe's best friend, and eventually once Zoe is gone, we end up having Carly, who is now like just so into popping every little bit of pills. And so because we end up finding out what Carly does. It seems like Carly had gotten a way too far into the rabbit hole, even so much more so than Zoe could have ever had. So we go on to seemingly have it to where eventually, uh, since Zoe is to know that Mark is a recovering alcoholic, it seems that Zoe tries to go to yet another party with Mark. It seems that I guess Zoe was not going to drink alcohol, but I guess really her not drinking alcohol was actually just not to be drinking alcohol in front of Mark. So after this party that both Mark and Zoe go to, we end up having it to where eventually Mark is to see Zoe drink some shot of sort, and we end up having both Mark and Zoe arguing, and I am assessing shortly thereafter breaking up. going on to here, we end up having eventually Zoe, who is to spend some time with Carly, and it seems we end up having Zoe, who ends up starting to do some scandalous like photos, like almost revealing almost everything. And we end up having it seemingly Carly going on to some social media or something, and all of a sudden there's a giant amount of male characters that are all going on to like comment on these photos. Ooh la la. So we end up having Zoe, who is going like, "Hey, like, is it weird? Like, all of these guys are all males and they're all talking and all chatting about this." So here's where we have Carly go down the rabbit hole, because eventually we end up having Carly starting to get Zoe into some things, and eventually she gets pushed much further than she would have really wanted to. So we seemingly end up having Zoe, who is to eventually get mixed up with a character named Jason, who is to reasonably at some point wanting to get Zoe on doing some drugs of sorts, but then after that, we end up having Jason, who is to eventually uh, kind of what is the word? Sales pitch his way into Zoe quite possibly doing a video of sorts. It's like, well, Zoe has shown some skin before. How about she go ahead? She goes ahead and does a video, and we end up having Zoe not exactly knowing what this video is exactly going to entail. We end up having it to where Zoe is to think that she is supposed to be doing things with just Carly, but then eventually we end up seeing this video where it ends up being seemingly Zoe and a man that is forced upon her, with basically Jason like telling, "Do it, man, jump in." So we are to basically showcase every single one of these videos being some illegal video that these people are all profiting off of. And so while that is going on, while we get to eventually realize that information, we end up having Zoe, who is to eventually tell Echo that if she ever sees this Jason character, to never ever like uh, go with him or do anything that he says. Uh, we end up having it to where within this movie we end up having Echo, who is to eventually read parts of Zoe's diary and realize that it seems that Zoe had left Echo a birthday present, and we end up having Zoe read about it and open it up and realize that it's a diary that Echo was to give to her for her birthday, but we end up having Echo, who ends up just finding it, and she starts bawling her eyes out after she finds it, to have the ghost of Echo kind of comforting her as she is to bawl her eyes out. So we eventually have Echo, who is to cling on to Mark, to basically ask him, well, uh, that Echo had found Zoe's diary with him, and Mark ended up having to take this diary from Zoe for collateral. So we end up having Echo mention to Mark that it seems that when Zoe was to actually, or when Echo was to seemingly put on familiar clothes, that Carly mistakes Echo as Zoe. we end up having eventually Echo or Carly, who ends up muttering something that doesn't quite exactly make any sense exactly to Echo, to where she's trying to like decipher it and whichever. So we end up finding that Mark is telling, or Echo is telling Mark this information, that there is some video out there that it seems that has to do something with Zoe. So we end up having Zoe, who ends up doing this video with Mark because, or with, not Mark, with Jason. And so we end up having Zoe, who, after doing this video, is just broken. She's distraught. And so we end up having Zoe, who ends up talking to Carly about the video, on how it seems like she did this video without real and true actual consent. It seems that we have it to where Zoe is like, you know how much damage that video probably did to me? And we end up having Carly, who ends up swerving it and swaying it to basically give Zoe drugs, and also to basically tell her, it's like, well, like, you were there, I was there, everyone was there. You, like, there was nothing there that you did not consent to, or you didn't go along with, or whichever. Like, it's obvious in the video, it's obvious in whatever, that you wanted every little bit of what like happened there, and it was like, uh, clever editing also could help that case too. So we eventually have Zoe, who is going off to the side, just bawling her eyes out because her world is not in her control. So we end up having it to where eventually Echo is to basically follow into the rabbit hole of Zoe, because we have it to where Echo wants to bring some justice to Jason and have him be arrested for the thing that he had done to her sister. And so we end up having Echo, who is to go on and eventually follow Jason, and basically have also Jason talking about some video that they're going to be putting together. And so we end up having it to where Echo is to know full well that she is going to follow along with Jason. And so we end up having Echo, who's desperately asking Mark to eventually come to the location that she needs him to be there for, to protect her, or to otherwise eventually just call the cops on this guy. But either way, like, we end up having it to where Echo is to tell Mark to create some kind of distraction to where Echo can run down, find the evidence of all of these videos, and then run out of there. And so we end up having Echo going along with Jason, pretending that she is going to put this video on and do this video. But we end up having eventually Mark, who is to eventually get this text a little too late because he's pumping iron in the weightlifting room. And so we end up also having at some point Echo seemingly talking to a guy named Parker. There is at points in time when actually Echo is actually talking to her best friend at points in time in here, where it seems that her best friend is like talking about what's going on in school. We end up having her best friend also pushing her into a party, which eventually pushes her into Carly, which pushes her into Jason. Um, but she didn't know any better. So, her Echo's best friend. So we also have it to where really Mark is actually seeing Echo in these parties, and he is basically trying to pull her out of it because he knows that a guy like Jason is very dangerous, but he doesn't explain why. But anyways, so back at this tail end here. So we end up having Echo, who is to eventually try and find these videotapes and witness some of these videos. And so we end up having, of course, that Jason is thinking that this girl knows a little bit too much. And so we end up having Mark, who ends up deciding to have bizarrely Parker come along with him to eventually cause an accident outside this person's car and to eventually fight it out afterwards to just kind of delay Echo getting these tapes and leaving, which she never actually does. We end up having it to where Echo is to eventually get these tapes while Jason uh, is haggling with Mark, but we end up having Jason, who is to, of course, beat up Mark and to eventually come back to see that Echo is still in this room. And so we end up having Jason, who is to basically tie or like zip tie up Echo to basically say, like, dude, we need to like murder this girl or something. Like, we need to not have this girl see the light of day because reasonably if she talks, like, we're gonna go to prison forever. Like, we're gonna like have numerous counts of this and this and this and that. And so like we need to pull the plug on this whole operation. And so we end up having eventually that Parker is to run into this house to eventually try and find Echo. And so we end up eventually having Echo, who is to get free from these zip ties, and we end up having Echo, who is to have Parker call the police, and of course he does. We end up having eventually some guy run in, Jason's friend running in, and so we end up having Echo taking him out to where Parker is calling for the police and naming all kinds of things, kidnappings, and so on and so forth. So we end up having Echo, who single handedly arrests both Jason and this other guy, and she ends up getting justice for her sister. And so we end up having it to where uh, Echo is to eventually go on to eventually find out that it seems that Zoe had decided one day that she wanted to take a drive, and she was to give Mark her diary for collateral, so that way she could go on this drive. It seems that Mark ended up having this Mustang. Evidently, this Mustang that I guess he was trying to sell, but like wasn't even going to ever be able to. It seems that Mark had some issues with things, but reasonably, again, um, Mark has kind of been the good guy. Mark has kind of been the knight in shining armor through the rest of this movie, so I guess we can forgive him. But yeah, I think really just Zoe just bizarrely in this movie riding off in the sunset, not telling us exactly what ended up happening to Zoe, as we end up having Zoe just telling us that she was broken and that reasonably, like, she, I think, just needed a change of pace, a different part of scenery. We end up having also Echo, who in the very beginning of this film, like, is starting her first day of high school, and we end up having it to where we have Echo, who is telling her father, yeah, it was my first day of high school, and we have Echo's father, who is completely oblivious. We end up having also this entire family going and seeking like family therapy together to grieve of the loss of their now missing sister or missing daughter or missing whichever. And so it seems like there are these back and forth like sessions that we keep seeing popping up, where people are just kind of dealing with things. And we end up having also Kim Jong's character, who is also kind of like making the consensus of like what he thought about Zoe, and that he thought that she had plenty of friends, and he doesn't even understand why Zoe had left the way she did. But yeah, I think that does kind of cover everything. Plus, yeah. If anything, if there was anything that I missed somewhere, let me know in the comments below. Or reasonably, yeah, I didn't want to make this a huge, long hour review either. Just because, again, this movie is a fairly, like, it's a fairly common film. There's a lot of partying going on. There's a lot of rebellious teenager things going on in this movie. And so, yeah, really, that's all that I guess I really wanted to say about this film. Bizarrely, it also kind of reminded me about the show The Sinner a little bit, like the first season. Like how eventually we end up having Jessica Biel, who ends up kind of like going down the rabbit hole of meeting a guy who ends up like basically ruining her life, to where Jessica Biel ends up like seeing a or hearing a song one day that reminds her about a horrible situation, to where eventually we end up having Jessica Biel, who ends up taking a knife and seemingly stabbing a guy multiple times for reasons she can't quite understand, but then eventually we end up finding out that this one song triggers this event. And so we end up having Jessica Biel go through that rabbit hole of trying to rediscover what all led her to this moment of now realizing that she could or could not have killed a man, because they might decide certain kind of either ways of this and that. But with that said, I think that's all. I'm even going into other things now. So reasonably, I like the mystery of this movie, but also I'm just kind of like, yeah, it's also kind of confusing once basically one character or two characters have almost the exact same, they're fairly lookalikes, or also they're just kind of, especially when Echo was to start curling her hair and trying as much as possible to look like Zoe, like things started to get a little murky or a little bit confusing. Um, but with that said, yeah, I think with that, I am going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.